Welcome back to Whence, a Freemasonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Robert Johnson. This is episode 194. In the news this week, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we do have our application out, which is completely free now. So if you download the podcast source application and you search Whence, I believe it is the top podcast in their section for education. You should see our tile right there, right on top. So check that out. You'll get access to all the papers we read, as well as Masonic wallpapers for your mobile device. So check it out. In addition, I just wanted to say that Masonic Radio Theater released All Points Bulletin episode number 6. I hope you guys all enjoy that. And thanks for everyone who donated to the Dyslexia Center Walk. If you still want to help out the center even more, you can by going to freemasonryart.com and buying whatever you want there. Amazing things by Brother Whence pulled it up. And use the promo code CCDC at the checkout, and you'll get 10% off, as well as Brother Juan will send 10% back to the center for this support. So thank you again for everybody who helped us out with that Dyslexia Center Walk for Metropolitan Chicago at the Valley of Chicago. Thanks to everyone who came out to the education banquet in Bloomington. It was a fantastic time, and I hope you all had an amazing time watching Celebrate the Craft. They did so well. It was a great time. We live tweeted if you were checking that out, myself as well as the fellows from the Masonic Roundtable, and I hope you caught our pregame show. It was chock full of awesome stuff. If you pre-ordered a lapel pen, it went out in the mail, and thank you so very much. We are just about all caught up on mailing everything out, and we just got the items last Thursday, actually. Other items which we had made are, of course, the cufflinks. We kept those under wraps as much as we could anyway. We had tie bars made, and the big one was the money clips. So the money clips are really sharp looking. Check those out. They're extremely limited in supply as far as the money clips, the cufflinks, and the tie bars. I only have 24 of each, and some of them have already sold. So don't wait. Get it now if you want it. If you would like a button style pin, the old campaign style buttons, those are only $5, and we'll ship those out as well. I've got copies of Tales from the Craft by illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison on the WCY store as well. $18, ships anywhere in the continental United States, and for $25, international shipping anywhere else in the world. So please check those things out. They all go to support this show. This week, I have an interesting interview, or rather a conversation with my co-author, Brother Frater O, is what we'll call him, about esoteric frustrations in Lodge and overcoming these things. And also, we talk a little bit about the journey that we all take when we start on the Masonic path. It was a really fun interview. We sat down over an afternoon and just really kicked around some interesting ideas. We started with some little questions here and there. We went back and forth. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you have questions, go ahead and you can send those questions to fratero@gmail.com, and he will answer you. Without any further ado, we'll go right in.
Ow now, brown cow. Ow now, brown cow. The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
All right, everybody, this week, very lucky to have a great friend and brother of mine. We're going to call him Frater O for the interview. He keeps things a little bit separate, so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about everything this afternoon. Lots of interesting things, esoteric, non-esoteric, lodge stuff, all kinds of goodies. He is actually my co-author for a book that will hopefully be released later this year, and it's an amazing project. He's just a great brother. So, Frater O, thank you for being on the show this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we've been around a long time, and O and I got together a long time ago, and we shared a bunch of neat Masonic experiences, and we started writing together, and it's been really cool, to say the least. Our journeys kind of crossed paths. The fate was all lined up for it. And a few times we met up in Washington, D.C. We did some research out there. We had a great time. So we're going to just ask some questions and do some discussion. So for brothers like us, why do you think, and when I say brothers like us, I mean esoterically inclined brothers, why do we find ourselves in Freemasonry?
So that's a really good question. I think any Mason who's really progressing along the path of self-reflection and asking those deep philosophical questions usually find themselves. And for all those brothers out there listening and the people who are along similar paths, you're not alone. And throughout society and throughout history, there's always been people who have questioned status quos, who have questioned ideas, or even questioned themselves. And they usually find themselves majority of the time in Masonic lodges. You can go back throughout history to Galileo questioning the authority on more of the planetary and solar and lunar alignments, or to people from revolutions, to just typical philosophers, or just a deep thinker in anywhere across the world. And so you kind of find yourself with similar people. And when you get into a simple mindset, you kind of attract whatever you're going after. And so when you start progressing down these roads or start progressing down these paths, you attract that towards you. And so for myself, I was asking, there's a lot more going on here that I see, and I'm not finding these answers in a local Blue Lodge. And I'm not interested in joining really any other bodies, or I'm not interested in joining outside organizations. So I turn the reflection inwards. And then when you start turning that inwards, that's where the deeper discussions with other brothers come along. And it's interesting that usually you have to find those outside of your local lodge. But majority of those times, they end up being brothers. I know we've sat down and had some deep discussions. And so hopefully that answers your question. I kind of went on a tangent there. But
No, yeah.
Throwing it back to you, how do you find yourself around these topics?
It is interesting. When I first joined, it was absolutely not what I had envisioned. And I think for lack of, we'll say that for about 3 or 4 months, I kind of just said to myself, this is what it is. I think I get it. I was told that these are my degrees, this is what it is, and it was up to me to do further study. And so I said, I guess it's there if I do the work. And like anything else, you have to do the work if you want an outcome. And so I started studying, and I was very much interested in why we all kind of find ourselves, so many esoteric people find themselves in the Blue Lodge. I've got several friends of mine they're members of the Golden Dawn, they're members of the OTO, they're members of all these other esoteric organizations, and ultimately they all started right in the Blue Lodge. And it's just really interesting to look at all the connections that we kind of had. It's almost like something was programmed in our head. It's the one thing we all have in common, is that we all have this little spark that kind of was an itch, and we finally scratched it. And when we did, we found ourselves in the Blue Lodge. It's the one thing that we all had in common. But like you said, there's several nights where we've had these deep conversations, and I'm sure the brothers listening have had these too, where you get on the phone with a brother like Frater O here, and I'll call him on the way home from work just to say, hey, what's up, how are things going in your life, and vice versa. And it's a 38-minute drive for me to get home, and I'm on the phone for an hour, because I'll get home and I just sit in my car, and we're so deep in a discussion that I'm just sitting in my car, summertime, windows rolled down, and we're just hanging out talking. And I think those are a lot of the interesting things come out. We're talking about the self-introspection and stuff. We'll open it up to, and I kind of alluded to some of my early frustrations with the Blue Lodge, not finding exactly what I wanted when I came into the lodge. I don't think I found exactly what I was looking for initially, because what were my expectations? My expectations were I was going to be taught these universal truths of philosophy and stuff. I think my idea of Masonry was I was going to be explained, the philosophies of Plato in a way that made sense to me. I think that's maybe somewhat of what I was thinking that I was going to get, but I didn't get that right away. So, did you have frustrations early on?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at any system in general, it's just a tool, regardless of whatever modality, whatever dogmatic system, they're just tools. And all paths lead to the top of the mountain. Some people gravitate towards different paths, but ultimately it's the top of the mountain. And so with the old ancient saying of, the Japanese saying is that no one can eat for you. You presented some amazing tools on, how the system works, how, your internal system works. So the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how to really use that to your advantage. And when I say that to your advantage, I'm not talking about magic, and I'm not talking about taking control of other people and all this crazy conspiracy stuff that gets completely blown out of proportion online. It's more gaining control of yourself, that inner fight that a lot of people have, and you're fighting dragons consistently internally, regardless if you want to call it the ego or whatever system. And so Masonry, for me, I was able to really dig deeper internally, but the frustrations were, again, I couldn't find those answers at the Blue Lodge. I mean, they present the tools, which was great, is because they show you a door, but if you're kind of like an egotistical mindset, or if you're more stuck in an older mindset, or as the New Age movement loves to call it, a lower vibration, you're not going to be able to do any work, is because you're going to be seeking externally, and you're going to be looking everywhere for an answer. And the more you look in any direction, the more you're going to see. But until you stop, until you do the self-reflection and you apply it internally, then that's when you start uncovering a lot more deeper aspects. So in the beginning, the frustrations is that it would always point you like, oh, you should talk to this person, or you should talk to that person, and it always seems like that person usually had a definitive answer. And this is only a personal statement, but usually when I've become around personal or people that have like definitive answers and who have an end result, usually don't know an answer, or they've found it for themselves, and that answer doesn't define it for me. So that's, I think, the great part of the quest, and for any esoteric Mason, is to ask those questions and travel outside of your lodge, reach out to brothers like us, reach out to people that you've read their book, and reach out to them. The simple idea of the Matthew 7:7, seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. Until you go seeking, until you go searching, nothing's going to come to you. You're still going to be in the same exact state. You're still going to be thinking about searching, but never going searching. So right. I think for any esoteric Mason, they want to jump into it, but they don't know where to start. And maybe this is some catalysts, some things for them to start, or maybe I'm wrong, and maybe some other opinions or other things have worked for other people.
Yeah, but, I think that
was my frustrations as Rick Mason.
So when we look back at it, talking about individual experiences and what might work for somebody might not work for another. So if you guys listening hear something that strikes a chord with you, cool. If you completely disagree, let us know. Let us know what's working for you and what you're doing and how you're overcoming some things and working through this. Well, we kind of alluded to where we go once we're in the Blue Lodge. Guys like myself, I've been a Mason since 2008, and I think in that time, my lodge meets every single week. We don't go dark, and I've missed 3 meetings in 7 or 8 years. And thinking about that, I'm very active. My lodge is not some overtly esoteric lodge. It's a typical Blue Lodge with an amalgamation of different brothers. Some are very esoteric, some are looking for just brotherhood and camaraderie, from their military days. Ultimately, we have that great fraternal bond, and we gather there. But asking the question is, and Brother O also is a very active brother as well. When we kind of look at where we are in the Blue Lodge, is there another level of Masonry? And I'm not talking about Scottish Rite, I'm not talking about York Rite. I mean, is there another level of Masonry? Is there a group, official or unofficial, that meets like we do? And we talk about these things, or that there are these other organizations, like, there's the Rosicrucians, there's all these other organizations. What other levels, or what other organizations do you think would help Masons? I'm sure there's other groups like OTO and Golden Dawn, but are you aware of any other organizations that kind of exist outside the confines, I guess, of quote-unquote Masonry that are Masonic?
Absolutely, there's organizations. And what I've found personally through my journey, and this is my journey, and I'm only going to speak about that way. And again, like I mentioned before, is when you start progressing down a path, regardless of whatever path that may be, it could be, a career path, a family path, a personal path, an esoteric path, a finance path, whatever path that is that you start progressing, you literally start to manufacture that or track that or whatever you want to call that. And so when you start progressing down an esoteric path and you start doing more inner self-reflection and inner work, you start attracting that. And I found that interesting is when you start getting into the independent bodies, the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. It seems for me that there's usually a lot more deeper discussions in esoteric Masons that usually get attracted or you find in those circles. And this is my own personal philosophy, is that Blue Lodge is great. It presents great working tools. But if you're looking for more aspects, I know you and I have found a lot of those in York or Scottish. And
Yes.
There's also to be something to be said about hidden doors inside of York and Scottish. And, and if you are, if you sit in certain chairs in like the York Rite, there's other side bodies that will open up to you. And or if you're around certain Masons in the Scottish Rite and you're well versed in certain topics, or if you are literally doing the inner work, they usually open up doors to you. And those could be philosophical colleges, those can be book clubs, those can just be simple conversations of guys getting together around a table with beers and just having some simple down-to-earth conversations. So there's definitely organizations out there internally inside of Masonry, but externally, I think you mentioned a few of them.
Sure.
What have you found with you? I mean, with your search, are there other levels outside of Blue Lodge?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, kind of alluded to, whether you believe it or not, it's the law of attraction, I guess, we're kind of alluded to, the secret, if anybody's ever read those books. Sure, some of it you might believe in, some of it you might think is hokey or whatever, but it is very interesting concept, and the more I reflected on whether or not I think it works, I think when my heart is in the right place, and I tend to use those tools like affirmations or the secret, as we like to call it, you do kind of attract the kind of, I guess not the conversations you want, but the conversations you need. Anytime I talk to Brother O or certain other brothers, I guess those would be what I call equitable conversations, things that bring something to the table for me personally, and I hope I can bring something to the table for somebody else. They are conversations that I can't just have with anybody else, because they will either look at me cross-eyed or think I'm absolutely crazy, or it's just interesting to be put in those conversations by constantly thinking about these things, you putting it out there, and you attract these conversations and ultimately these groups. Of course, the groups are kind of interesting. There is the gathering out in Virginia on the East Coast, the AMD Masonic Week, and the AMD is primarily Masonic research. So there's Rosicrucian groups that gather there, along with a ton of other groups, and I would be willing to bet there are quite a few esoterically inclined brothers that do in fact attend those kind of events. And I'm sure if you're looking for somebody to talk to, there'll be no shortage of anybody. But to that end, if you guys ever have questions, feel free to shoot me an email, and maybe we can come up with some sort of anonymous email for Brother O so he can answer your questions also. Kind of moving on, we talked about this before, bro, but we've kind of talked about how the fraternity, or kind of the interesting people that join the fraternity, the place where we gather changes over time. These free-thinking societies, they kind of move from society to society to fraternity over time. Is Masonry just a temporary home for esoteric thinkers, or do you think we've always kind of had a home here and we travel off and come back sometimes?
That's a really good question. If you look out through the ages, there's always been some sort of philosophical school or some sort of school of thought. And you can, throughout the ages, have always pointed, regardless if it's the ancient Atlantean theory or story of the Brotherhood of the Snake, or the Pythagoreans in Greece, and to many different societies, from the Templars to Sufi cultures. There's many different systems that have always been behind the scenes, and some people like to refer to it as some of the invisible organizations that pull the strings from behind the scenes, or just another philosophical school. So regardless of the name, and right now we have the name Freemasonry, we have had for 300 plus years. That can be argued through historians back and forth, but I'm not interested in getting into those arguments. So if anyone out there thinks I'm wrong on the dates, please excuse me. But there's always going to be that people that question the status quo or question an idea. And when I say the status quo, if you look at the movement of just the whole the religion systems in Europe and how dogmatic they were, and to even if you look at the systems of World War II with Nazi Germany and Hitler trying to get rid of all the Masonic lodges, is because Masons are taught to really do introspection and reflection, and really focus on the greater good. And usually when that comes into play, that questions the status quo. And so throughout the ages, people that question the status quo usually have to disappear, duck into places and say, hey, I think it's this, and not be called crazy, not be questioned by the current system, but to be able to have those discussions and have those discussions openly. And then have someone sit there and think and pause and give their self-reflection, like we've done.
Sure.
And you've mentioned that you've done the lodges, and I've been fortunate to sit with some great brothers and have those discussions. Because let's face it, when we start getting into this, there's a lot more greater things going on than you and I in the universe, and a lot more greater things. And we're all having like one small introspective. And we can pull that introspective back and bounce it off another person and go, I think it's this, it might be this, I've been questioning this, what do you think this is? So it gives you a sounding board to base things off of, especially when you start to get into deep reflection, and you start getting into consciousness or meditations or even defeating the ego or those aspects. And ultimately, a lot of esoteric Masons are into those areas. And that's my personal opinion. I could be completely wrong. But turning the question, I think that kind of covered a few areas of your question. Turning it back around, the question back to you, I would love to hear on how you feel on it.
Well, like I said, we've kind of gone round and round and round, like sticking with, you can look at historical side of things where we, there's all kinds of books like Born in Blood and things like that talk about how the Templars, begat Masonry, or perhaps Masons existed and the Templars, interjected, and that's where they found a home. But yeah, I think Masonry, if you look back, of course there's operative and there's speculative, and then there was both, and now there's just speculative. But there's a lodge in Pompeii that was dated back then, and it's a operative lodge, so who knows what they did in there. However, the working tools and a lot of the same similar things were there, so we can look at that and we can say, well, Masonry is this old. The teachings may have been pulled in from all different areas, right? We know for a fact that many of the things that we do in a lodge have origins well outside of Christian dogma. We pull from, there's Egyptian stuff, there's Greek stuff, Mesopotamian stuff, there's all kinds of stuff. It's almost like for the first time, you've grown up your whole life and you've just read the Bible, and then you realize that Noah may have been Gilgamesh, or these stories are a lot older than we think they are. And I think a lot of the ideas and the things that we're studying today, philosophically, whether in lodge or outside of lodge, or whatever group you're a part of, we pulled those from a lot of different areas. And it's kind of like we amalgamate in Masonry, and maybe we come home to gather, and then we go back out and we gather more information, or maybe we that's the first place we go is Masonry, and then from there that's our jumping point to get to the other areas that we need to get to. Over the last couple hundred years, there have been all kinds of schools that have popped up and gone away. There was the Illuminati that started and phased out. And
wait, you're telling me it phased out? It's not still around?
Oh, well, you never know. If you know what we know, then maybe you know something different. But so there's that, and there's all kinds of other groups that have popped up and gone away. And a lot of these groups, I think, started up pre-World War I and then went away. But we'll get into that maybe in a little bit. But yeah, I think Masonry, I don't think Masonry is a temporary home for esoteric thinkers. I think it's a permanent base of operations, a place maybe we always fall back to. But that brings me up to another question, another idea. And this in no way is disrespectful to any brother who joined for the brotherhood, the camaraderie, because that's what we do. But as far as esoteric thinkers, things like that, the idea has been proposed a few different ways, and it's going to sound harsh at first, but I want the listeners to kind of understand where we're going with this. Is the Blue Lodge just a waiting room?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That can be argued back and forth, regardless of some person's view. And this has been written about extensively. And The views and opinions that I've expressed earlier are strictly personal. They do not represent any lodge. They do not represent any organization. I think this can be said for you too as well, RJ. And absolutely, without a doubt, it's a weighting system. And this is my personal philosophy: is that it's a filtration system, and it is definitely the lobby of an organization. So if we look at an organization as a structure, and I know the conspiracy theorists are going to go nuts with this one, but it's furthest from the truth. But it's definitely a lobby. It's definitely the starting ground. Masonry teaches about operative masonry and applying it to speculative, correct? And it teaches you about a foundation. It teaches you on what that foundation is. And some people maybe understand what that foundation is and what that foundation can build towards. And I'm just going to be very elusive here because I don't want to reveal any secrets. But the esoteric Mason might know, and some Masons might not know. And those Masons that don't know, search for those questions of what are you building towards, or what is that spiritual building. If we get into the idea of, King Solomon's temple, that house was made without or hammer and a quarry. Maybe I know you're a worshipful master. Maybe you know that line better than I do. What was that line? King Solomon's temple is
King Solomon's temple was built without any. There were no hands. Basically, there was no sound of hammer or axe at the actual building, because everything was hewn and squared where the timbers were felled and the stones were chipped out. Something along those lines, yeah. Absolutely.
So, again, getting back to, is the Blue Lodge a waiting room? It most definitely is. I just only want to allude to certain things, and if Masons that want to hear more about this is something that we can continue discussing, absolutely. But I want to turn this, again, like I normally do towards the end of my question, back over to you, RJ, is how do you feel about the Blue Lodge being a waiting room?
I think, essentially, to have a level of equality in the lodge, it is necessary that we all be on the level and that we recognize it is not, you're never higher than the third degree. That said, I do agree that once you hit that third step, rather than going up further steps to the 33rd or the Knight Templar degree, it's more of two hallways. But what I think people need to understand is it's not just two hallways. There are a million bazillion, we're talking about hallways infinitum. As Brother O talked about earlier, reaching the top of the mountain to different paths. Whatever path you take, that's your hallway, right? And the Blue Lodge gets you there. So is it a waiting room? Two ways to look at that, right? The conspiracy theory is looking at that surface level. Oh, it's the waiting room because that's where you go when you get to the highest level of the 360th degree Mason, who is working at he's working with the United States government, the United Nations, or the Bilderbergs, or what's the other one that sounds interesting?
Council of Foreign Relations.
Yes, the Council of Foreign Relations. In a sense, in the most literal sense, it could be contrived as a waiting room because you're making connections and you're networking, and you will make friends with people in high places, because we all know, and we say it in Lodge, that Masonry brings together people who might otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance. Now, the second half of that is it a waiting room? So we're going more toward the mind side of things, the mental side of things. Yeah, it's a waiting room, right? Because it's where you go to get to the place until you find your path. However you're going to get there. You come into the Blue Lodge, you get your lessons, you get your degrees, you start to understand things, and then the more you start applying these things, you're looking at these different levels. Guys like Manly P. Hall said that there's seven levels to everything, right? So if you take on those surface levels of what we tell you in Masonry, and maybe you chip away until you get to that seventh level of how deep a subject really is for you, and then you can take that. And maybe that's the first or the second step, because your first step on the journey is coming into the Blue Lodge, right? And so maybe that second step is hopping on the path. And maybe, you want to think about that esoterically. Your first step is Blue Lodge, your second step is on the path, and your third step, well, maybe that's when you reach the pinnacle. There's an interesting book. It's described as a thought experiment. It's called God's Debris. It's by the guy who did Dilbert. And it's a fantastic book. It's 180 pages, but it's a really interesting book. And so at the end of the book, I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say maybe that third step, now you have achieved avatar consciousness. So take away with that, what you might. But it is an interesting concept that the Blue Lodge could be contrived or conceived as a waiting area. I want to talk a little bit about going back to the second question we asked, which was frustrations in the Blue Lodge for the esoteric Mason. Should we, in the Blue Lodge, now this is again something that we'll clarify right away. Our views, Brother O and myself, this is not anything that is backed by any Grand Lodge or any other body. Just a discussion of one of many problems. I think that any organization has problems, right? We're not saying anything bad about Masonry, but one of the issues is what happens in a lodge. A lot of guys join and they hear the minutes and they hear this, that, and the other, and then they leave. Some guys, we can have the whole conversation another time. Is Masonry a charity or is it charitable? Now, these are all interesting questions that everybody has an opinion to, but should the fraternity in the Blue Lodge, should we be teaching the esoteric stuff in the lodge, or is that something that we really need to leave up to the individual brother to seek for himself?
Well, any Mason, that lesson usually is presented in the first degree, and I lean personally more towards let the individual find it for himself, because that's kind of the whole idea of the journey, is it not?
I agree.
If you don't go searching for anything, sorry to cut you off, go ahead.
I totally agree but go ahead and finish your thought there.
It's you have to go searching for it. This is your journey. You're the hero of your story, and you need to go out there and find it. Now, whatever that may be, it could be love, it could be esoterics, it could be whatever you're searching for, and it could be deeper aspects of Masonry. You have to go out there and find it. It's not going to find you.
Right. And alluding to what you said earlier, the Japanese saying, nobody can eat for you.
Absolutely. So I think anything should be hidden. But then again, if you think about it, everything anyone ever needs is always hidden in plain sight. The fundamental person itself needs to make the conscious change internally to recognize where that is. Like everything consistently is hidden in plain sight. You can see that out throughout history, but that person just needs to make that change. How do you feel about that?
I would add to exactly what you said. I absolutely feel that it should be left up to the individual. It is an individual journey for everybody. I know many brothers who are so frustrated, and they're frustrated that Blue Lodges are not teaching esoterics. And I understand the frustration, but when you realize that you doing the work, and then you kind of self-reflect back and you say, well, why didn't they cover this in Blue Lodge? Well, the answer is probably simple, and that answer is each individual has their own interpretation of how things go. And life is about the journey, not the destination, these kind of things. You can't tell somebody the secrets because there's just no real way to convey them. It's the same reason why the History Channel gets away with showing ritual, right? Because it doesn't matter what you see, because until you've experienced it, it has nothing for you. There's no value. I think, as you said, everything is always hidden in plain sight until we learn to look inward or learn to see things. And when we do that, you can look at it like when a child is born, right? We don't know anything. We rely on other people to tell us what things are, what they look like, how to recognize things, how to communicate, how to see things. We don't know what a bottle of ketchup looks like until mom or dad says, this is the ketchup, right? And so that's fine and well and good with material objects. But I think in the mental realm, in the esoteric realm, in the spiritual realm of things, I think that that's what Masonry kind of does, right? We allude to things because you're conveying ideas that can't be conveyed any other way other than the way we do it. It's why we say Masonry is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Well, why by symbols? Well, first, we can look at we're a system of morality. Well, morality can be defined as many things, so we'll move on. Veiled in allegory. We're telling a story, but the story is still veiled, right? So we may be saying that there's a deeper implication to the story, and we're illustrating that story with a symbol. So the symbol isn't a word, right? It's a symbol. So a symbol can mean an entire encyclopedia of different things. We're telling somebody stories and showing them symbols that represent these stories. You're remembering your degrees, you're remembering different things about these symbols, and that's going to be different for every person. I really do feel like, kind of going back to the question, it's tangent crazy, but
no, this is good. This is deep stuff, and this is stuff that Masons need to hear. So it's not a tangent by any means.
Well, so we're looking at it and we say, should we leave it up to the lodge to teach esoterics? No. I think the lodges are doing the right thing if they do the ritual correctly. They provide an outlet for further study, and I think that's where their responsibility really ends, because that's where you, as the individual Mason, has to either hit up your lodge's library, and if your lodge doesn't have one, hit up the public library. And if your public library doesn't have one, then use the internet, find the books, find the different things. If you don't know where to start, there are tons and tons of articles written about where the esoteric Mason should start in his reading materials. I would never suggest an esoteric Mason, the first thing you pick up is Morals and Dogma. I think that's a mistake. It's just too big. However, if you're a more seasoned Mason, perhaps that might be up your alley. Definitely, it should be up to the individual Mason to go out on his own and do the research.
And I just want to piggyback off of some things you said during your answer to that question. You covered on a lot of great topics, and it was really nicely said, is that if the Masons out there that are esoterically inclined aren't finding what they're looking for, well, then my question to you is, what's stopping you from creating something like a book club or a philosophical college so you can get like-minded individuals together? So if you're not finding what you're looking for, create it. And you'd be surprised if you create something, a lot of people usually come around that. And I'm not saying to create a different system than Masonry. I want to make that very clear. I'm talking about book clubs or even like a social gathering of just brothers that are like-minded to have discussions. And you'd be surprised because, again, when you make that change internally, like Masonry teaches about, you start affecting conscious around you, people around you, and you start changing that. So when you change yourself, you change others. So, I think these discussions need to happen a lot more. I'm sure a lot of other esoteric Masons would say so. I think a lot of Masons out there that aren't esoterically inclined would beg to differ. But, what Masonry is great is because, like you mentioned, it is that melting pot. So if you want to hear the minutes, you can hear the minutes. If you want to be part of the charity and the fundraising clubs, you can do that. If you want the philosophical colleges, you can find that. There's all kinds of things inside of it that you can join. I just wanted to just touch on that.
Absolutely. It's funny that you said that. There was a paper I read not too long ago, and I'm sorry I don't have the notes with me. I can't tell you which one it was. However, it clearly stated that within the Blue Lodge, you have different types of Masons. And I think the paper was done by a Grand Master, actually. And he said, you're going to find Masons who are there for the Brotherhood. So there's that brand. There's the charity, there's the esoteric, and there's the ritualist. But then he also went as far as to say there's also the vultures. And the vultures are ritualists who constantly pick on you for getting a word wrong, which was a comical aspect to that. But yes, there are all kinds in the Blue Lodge. And I think that's why one of the reasons we constantly say it doesn't get higher than the third degree, because yes, while we may have our different brands of Masonry for each of us, we are all still brothers on the level, and we are all Master Masons. I think that's where it ends. Guys, I thank you all for listening to the discussion here that Brother O and myself have had this afternoon. I say this afternoon, but you all are probably listening to it at night, which is fine, or maybe early in the morning on commute. I hope it didn't fry out your brain too hard that you can't concentrate at work. If you have any questions for Brother O, shoot them to me over at wcypodcast@gmail.com or at admin@wcypodcast.com, and I will forward them over to him, and if he has a response for you, then I'll shoot it right back to you. I'll just be the middleman. I just got to say thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, brother, for hopping on the show with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. These are some really great discussions that I think a lot more Masons should be having in the open and just talking about it in general. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, I really hope you enjoyed that. We had a great time talking over the afternoon, and now comes the time of the show where I will remind you how to support this show. Of course, what do we do with the support? Well, we bring you the program, and one of the perks that we were able to do now is to offer the application for the show absolutely free. So the papers we're reading on the show and the mobile wallpapers all to your mobile device. Let's say you're in Lodge, you want a Masonic education piece and you forgot it. Well, you can just open your phone and pull up any of the papers that we've done, and perhaps we've saved the day that way for you. So check those things out. Those are free. Of course, we also have a couple ways of supporting the show, and those are through shopping. So whether you're on onnit.com looking for some healthy living supplements, things like Alpha Brain, or any number of the other products they have that are fantastic, check those out. If you use the promo code WCY at checkout, you'll get 10% off, and they send a little bit back to the show. You can go to freemasonryart.com and check out any number of the amazing things Brother Juan Sepulveda has done over there with his artwork, whether it's an apron or fine prints. Again, use the promo code WCY. You'll get 10% off, and he sends a little bit back to this show as well. And last but certainly not least, freemasontees.com. Some of the most original designs in Masonic themed t-shirts, and I know you're going to love it. So check those out. Again, coupon code WCY. It's very simple. We keep the coupon code the same for everywhere. If you'd like to support the show again with a button pin or a lapel pin, perhaps a set of cufflinks, we've got the money clips, we have the tie bars now. So all of those things are all on WCYpodcast.com, and just click on the link for the limited edition store and it'll take you right into it. And if you just want to help the show and you don't want anything in return, I'll still send you a thank you though. You can't get away from that. You can check out the PayPal direct donation. So whether you donate $1 or $2 or whatever it is, it all goes back into this show and helps us keep the lights on. So thanks so very much. And now we'll go into the famous Freemason of the week. This week is Robert William Andrew Feller, born November 3rd, 1918, and he passed away on December 15th, 2010. He was nicknamed the Heater from Van Meter. Bullet Bob and Rapid Robert was an American baseball pitcher who played 18 seasons in Major League Baseball for the Cleveland Indians. Feller pitched from 1936 to 1941 and from 1945 to 1956, interrupted only by a 4-year sojourn in the Navy. In a career spanning 570 games, Feller pitched 3,827 innings and posted a win-loss record of 266 162 with 279 complete games, 44 shutouts, and a 3.25 earned run average. A prodigy who bypassed the minor leagues. Feller first played for the Indians at the age of 17. His career was interrupted by 4 years of military service in World War II, during which time he served as Chief Petty Officer aboard the USS Alabama. Feller became the first pitcher to win 24 games in a season before the age of 21. During his career, he threw no-hitters in 1940, 46, and 51. Feller also recorded 12 one-hitters. His no-hitters and one-hitters were records at that time of his retirement. He helped the Indians win a World Series title in 1948 and an American League record 111 wins and the pennant in 1954. Feller led the American League in wins 6 times and in strikeouts 7 times. In 1946, he recorded 348 strikeouts, a total not exceeded for 19 years. An 8-time All-Star, Feller was ranked 36th on Sporting News' list of the 100 greatest baseball players and was named the publication's greatest pitcher of his time. He was a finalist for the Major League Baseball All-Century Team in 1999. Baseball Hall of Fame member Ted Williams called Feller, quote-unquote, the fastest and best pitcher I ever saw during my career. Stan Musial believed he was, quote-unquote, probably the greatest pitcher of our era. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962 on his first ballot appearance. At the time, only 3 players ever had a higher percentage of ballot votes. He was elected the inaugural president of the Major League Baseball Players Association and participated in exhibition games, which featured players from both the Major and the Negro Leagues. Feller died at the age of 92 in 2010. He was a member of Grove Lodge, number 824, in Downers Grove, Illinois. That's it for this week. Please find us on Facebook. Check us out on Google Plus at the email address wcypodcast@gmail.com. If you have questions, you can send them to that address or at admin@wcypodcast.com. Either way, I'll get those. Follow us on Twitter at Whence. Check out the Masonic Radio Theater All Points Bulletin, episode number 6, which just came out. And on the Masonic Roundtable on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about dress codes in Lodge. Somewhat controversial. You're going to want to check that out as well. It'll go live at 10, 9 Central, and that's every Tuesday. Don't forget about the Midnight Freemasons publishing articles every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until next week, stay on the level. For Whence came you, I'm Robert Johnson.